Asleep with Gina Marie. Ready for a fascinating classic short story that could take you off to sleep or keep you company on your walk or while you cook dinner or garden or even clean the bathroom. Oh, we all could use help then, couldn't we? Well, I'm Gina, and Marie is off devising some more magic. Oh, and now you know about Bob, Engineer Bob. We all are so glad you are here again. And we welcome our new listeners, too. Thanks to all of you for your likes and your comments and your subscriptions. Oh, and listener Carol, you are so right. We do need more. But have you checked lately? You are all doing a wonderful job spreading the word about Fast Asleep. Those subscriptions are climbing. Oh, yes, I know. It's pretty clear. Many people love Agatha Christie. And don't you worry. There is so much more on the way from this delightful lady. So, let's switch away for a minute from our female authors. Those dramatic stories are so good. But if you are in the mood for something lighter, Lloyd Osbourne has just the story for you today. Oh, I love his sense of humor. I know, you're probably saying, who is Lloyd Osbourne? Well, he was an American writer of novels and short stories whose most well-known works were collaborations with his stepfather, a very beloved Scottish author, very much loved here at Fast Asleep, Robert Louis Stevenson. His stepfather is best known for, well, you know these, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Kidnapped, and don't forget A Child's Garden of Verses. You can scroll back any time to his The Body Snatcher right here on Fast Asleep, among some other Stevenson treasures here. Robert Louis Stevenson came into Mr. Lloyd Osbourne's life when Osbourne was just 7 years old. Stevenson met Lloyd and his mother in France when she was separated from Lloyd's father and on an artist's retreat. Lloyd Osbourne adored Stevenson immediately, and the feelings were reciprocated. Robert Louis Stevenson married Lloyd's mother 4 years later. Lloyd Osbourne had such wonderful memories of his stepfather, some of them while they were laying on the floor and drawing and painting together. In this manner, Stevenson actually came up with his most famous book, Treasure Island. He and Lloyd first drew out a map of an island and created. Oh, they spent many days and nights sketching harbors and woods and even characters. And guess what? In no time, Stevenson had a whole list of chapters and events and was ready to write a very good book. Now, could Lloyd actually claim collaboration rights at that young age? No, I mean, he never did. But Treasure Island is dedicated to Samuel Lloyd Osbourne. And read the inscription sometime. It says, to S.L.O., an American gentleman, in accordance with whose classic taste the following narrative has been designed. It is now in return for numerous delightful hours and with the kindest wishes dedicated by his affectionate friend, the author. I'll tell you what, with this kind of inspiration, Lloyd didn't have any choice. He became a wonderful writer himself, and he went on to actually co-author 3 books with his stepfather. They were The Wrong Box, The Ebb Tide, and The Wrecker. All this before Mr. Stevenson's very untimely death at the young age of 44. Now, a little tiny bit more about Lloyd Osbourne. He was Okay, here we go. He was born in San Francisco in 1868. Oh, after his mother married Robert Louis Stevenson, they all chartered a yacht. Tough life, huh? And they traveled extensively. It lasted years. From San Francisco to the Hawaiian Islands, and then on to Australia and to Samoa, with extended stays in every location. Now, Stevenson died in Samoa. He died the same year Lloyd Osbourne was appointed Vice Consul for the United States in Samoa. Osbourne became a father of 2 children with his first marriage. Unfortunately, that ended in divorce, but at the age of 68 years old, Lloyd married again while he was living in France and had another child. When the United States entered World War II, Osbourne had to return to the States. Now, that, of course, was 1941, but his second wife and their child did not live with him until 1947. I should say almost at that point, because when they finally arrived in the United States, mother and child, they arrived on the day Lloyd Osbourne died. Oh, geez. I think I need a little cheering up. How about you? Well, this story will certainly do the job. Written by an author about an author. Set in 1900, tuck in everybody, for Lloyd Osbourne's The Golden Castaways. All I did was to pull him out by the seat of the trousers. The fat old thing had gone out in the dark to the end of the yacht's boat boom and was trying to worry in the dinghy with his toe when, plump, he dropped into a 6-knot ebb tide. Of course, if I hadn't happened along in a launch, he might have drowned, but as for anything heroic on my part, why, the very notion is preposterous. The whole affair only lasted half a minute, and in 5, he was aboard his yacht and drinking hot scotch in a plush dressing gown. Oh, it was natural that his wife and daughter should be frightened. And natural, too, I suppose, that when they had finished crying over him, they should cry over me. Oh, he had taken a chance with that East River, and it had been the turn of a hair whether he floated down the current a dead grocer full of brine, or stood in that cabin a live one full of grog. Oh, now, I'm not saying a word against them, but as for Grossensteck himself, oh, he ought really to have known better, and it makes me flush even now to recall his monstrous perversion of the truth. He called me a hero to my face. He invented details to which my dry clothes gave the lie direct. He threw fits of gratitude. His family were theatrically commanded to regard me well, so that my countenance might be forever imprinted on their hearts. And they, poor devils, in a 7th heaven to have him back safe and sound in their midst, regarded and imprinted till I felt like a perfect ass, masquerading as a Hobson. Oh, that's a warrior of wind and sea. It was all I could do to tear myself away. Grossensteck clung to me. Mrs. Grossensteck clung to me. Teresa, oh, that was the daughter, Teresa too clung to me. I had to give my address. I had to take theirs. Medals were spoken of, gold watches with inscriptions, a common purse on which I was requested to confer the favor of drawing for the term of my natural life. I departed in a blaze of glory, and though I could not but see the ridiculous side of the affair, I mean as far as I was concerned, I was moved by so affecting a family scene, and glad, indeed, to think that the old fellow had been spared to his wife and daughter. I had even a pang of envy, for I could not but contrast myself with Grossensteck, and wondered if there were two human beings in the world who would have cared a snap whether I lived or died. No, of course, that was just a passing mood, for, as a matter of fact, I am a man with many friends, and I know that, well, some would feel rather miserable were I to make a hole in salt water, but, you see, I had just had a story refused by Schoonmaker's Magazine. It was a good story, too, and that always gives me a sinking feeling. Well, to think that after all these years I am still on the borderland of failure and can never be sure of acceptance, even by the second-class periodicals for which I write. Well, in a day or two, I managed to unload the case against Philpotts on somebody else, and off I started for the New Jersey coast with $150 in my pocket and no end of plans for a long autumn holiday. I never gave another thought to Grossensteck until one morning, as I was sitting on the veranda of my boarding house, the postman appeared and requested me to sign for a registered package. I opened it with some trepidation, for I had caught that fateful name written crosswise in the corner, and began at once to apprehend the worst. I think I have as much assurance as any man, but, oh, geez, it took all I had and more, too, when I unwrapped a gold medal, the thickness and shape of an enormous checker, and deciphered the following inscription: "Presented to Hugo Dundonald, Esquire, for having with signal heroism, gallantry, and presence of mind rescued, on the night of June 3rd, 1900, the life of Herman Grossensteck from the dark and treacherous waters of the East River." The thing was as thick as 2 silver dollars laid the one on the other, and gold, solid, ringing, massy gold all the way through. And it was associated with a blue satin ribbon besides, which was to serve for sporting it on my manly bosom. I set it on the rail and laughed, till the tears ran down my cheeks, while the other boarders, they all crowded about me, handed it from hand to hand, grew excited to think that they had a hero in their midst, and put down my explanation to the proverbial modesty of the brave. Blended with my amusement were some qualms. at the intrinsic value of that metal, for it could scarcely have cost less than $300 or $400. And it worried me to think that Grossensteck must have drawn so lavishly on his savings. It had not occurred to me, either before or then, that he was rich. Somehow, in the bare cabin of the schooner, I had received no such impression of his means. I had not even realized that the vessel was his own, taking it for granted that it had been hired, all standing, for a week or two with the put-by economies of a year. Well, his home address ought to have set me right, but I had not taken the trouble to read it, slipping it into my pocketbook more to oblige him than any idea of following up the acquaintance. It was one of the boarders that enlightened me.
"Grossensteck!"
he exclaimed.
"Why, that's the great cheap grocer of New York, the Park and Tilford of the lower orders. Oh, there are greenbacks in his rotten tea, and places to leave your baby while you buy his sanded sugar. And if you save 80 tags of his syrup, why, you get a silver spoon you wouldn't want to be found dead with. Oh, yeah, everybody knows Grossensteck."
Well, I pulled the great cheap grocer out of the East River, I said. There was certainly a greenback in that tea. And I took another look at my medal and began to laugh all over again.
"Oh, there's no reason why you should ever have another grocery bill," said the boarder. "Oh, that is, if flavor cuts no figure with you, and you'd rather eat condemned army stores than not."
I sat down and wrote a letter of thanks. It was a rather nice letter, for I could not but feel pleased at the old fellow's gratitude, even if it were a trifle overdone. And when all's said, it was undoubtedly a fault on the right side. I disclaimed the heroism and bantered him good-naturedly about that medal, which, of course, I said I would value tremendously and would wear it on appropriate occasions. I wondered at the time what occasion could be appropriate to decorate oneself with a gold saucer covered with lies. But naturally, I didn't go into that to him. You know, when you accept a solid chunk of gold, you might as well be handsome about it. And I piled it on about his being long spared to his family and to a world that wouldn't know how to get along without him. Oh, yes, it was a stunning letter, and I have often had the pleasure of reading it since, in a splendid frame, below my photograph. Well, I had been a month or more in New York, and December was already well advanced before I looked up my Grossenstecks, which I did one late afternoon as I happened to be passing in their direction. Oh, it was a house of forbidding splendor on the Fifth Avenue side of Central Park, and as I trod its marble halls, I could not but repeat to myself, "Behold, the grocer's dream." I could make no criticism of my reception by Mrs. Grossensteck and Teresa, whom I found at home and delighted to see me. Mrs. Grossensteck was a stout, jolly, motherly woman. Common, of course, but if you can understand what I mean, common in a nice way, and honest and unpretentious and likable. Now, Teresa, whom I'd scarcely noticed on the night of the accident, was a charmingly pretty girl of 18, very chic and gay, with pleasant manners and a contagious laugh. She had arrived at obviously the turn of the Grossensteck fortunes, and might, in refinement and everything else, have belonged to another clay. How often one sees that in America, the land above others of social contrast, where in the same family there are often 3 separate degrees of caste. Well, to get along with my visit, I liked them and they liked me, and I returned later the same evening to dine and meet Papa. I found him as impassionedly grateful as before, and with a tale that trespassed even further on the incredible. And after dinner we all sat around a log fire and talked ourselves into a sort of intimacy. They were wonderfully good people, and though we hadn't a word in common, nor an idea, we somehow managed to hit it off, as one often can with those who are unaffectedly frank and simple. You know, I had to cry over the death of little Herman in the steerage when they had first come to America 20 years ago, and how Grossensteck had sneaked ginger snaps from the slop baskets of the saloon.
Oh, the little tiffle. He never knew where they come from,
said Grossensteck.
And so, what matters it?
Oh, that's Papa's name in the slums, said Teresa. Yes, Uncle Ginger Snaps, they call him, because, well, at all his stores, they give away so many for nothing.
Oh, by Jove, I said, there are some nicknames that are patents of nobility.
What impressed me as much as anything with these people was their loneliness. Now, parvenus are not always pushing and self-seeking, nor do they invariably throw down the ladder by which they have climbed. The Grossenstecks would have been so well content to keep their old friends. But poverty hides its head from the glare of wealth and takes fright at altered conditions. Oh, they come, yes, said Mrs. Grossensteck, but they are scared of the fine house, of the high-toned help, of everything, being gold, you know, and fashionable. And when Papa sends their son to college or gives the girl a little stocking against her marriage day, well, they slink away, ashamed. Oh, Mr. Donald, but it's hard to thank and be thanked, especially when the favors are all of one side.
Oh, the rich, now they have everything,
said Grossensteck.
Everything but friends. 9.
New ones had apparently never come to take the places of the old, and the old had melted away. Theirs was a life of solitary grandeur, varied with dinner parties to their managers and salesmen. Socially speaking, their house was a desert island, and they themselves 3 castaways on a golden rock, scanning the empty seas for a sail. Oh, and to carry on that metaphor, I might say I was the sail,
and welcomed accordingly. I was everything that they were not. I was poor. I mixed with people whose names filled them with awe. My own was often given at first nights and things of that sort. In New York, the least snobbish of great cities, a man need have but a dress suit and car fare, if he be the right kind of man, of course, to go anywhere and hold up his head with the best. In a place so universally rich, there is even a certain piquancy in being a pauper. Oh, the Grossenstecks were overcome to think I shined my own shoes and had to calculate my shirts. And the fact that I was no longer young, well, that's the modern formula for 40, and next door to a failure in the art I had followed for so many years, why, that served just to whet their pity and their regard. My little trashy love stories seemed to them the fruits of genius, and they were convinced, the poor simpletons, that the big magazines were banded in a conspiracy to block my way to fame. "Oh, my dear boy," said Grossensteck, "you know as much of business as a child unborn. And I tell you, it's the same everywhere, in groceries, in hardware, in the alkali trade, in every branch of industry. The pig operators, they stand shoulder to shoulder to sufficate the little fellers like you. Now, you must combine with the other producers. You must line up and break through that ring. You must scare them out of their boots. And by God, I'll help you do it." In their naive interest in my fortunes, the Grossenstecks rejoiced at an acceptance, and were correspondingly depressed at my failures. A $15 poem would make them happy for a week. And when some of my editors were slow to pay, on the literary frontiers there is a great deal of this sort of procrastination. Uncle Gingersnaps was always hot to put the matter into the hands of his collectors and commence legal proceedings in default. Little by little, I drifted into a curious intimacy with the Grossenstecks. Their house, by degrees, became my refuge. I was given my own suite of rooms, my own latchkey. I came and went unremarked, and what I valued most of all was that my privacy was respected, and no one thought to intrude upon me when I closed my door. In time, I managed to alter the whole house to my liking, and spent their money like water in the process. Gorgeousness gave way to taste. I won't be so fatuous as to say my taste, but mine was in conjunction with the best decorators in New York. One was no longer blinded by magnificence, but found rest and peace and beauty. Teresa and I bought the pictures. She was a wonderfully clever girl, full of latent appreciation and understanding, which until then had lain dormant in her breast. I quickened those unsuspected fires, and though I do not vaunt my own judgment as anything extraordinary, it represented at least the conventional standard, and was founded on years of observation and training. Well, we let the old masters go as something too smudgy and recondite for any but experts, learning our lesson over one Correggio, which nearly carried us into the courts. and we bought modern American instead. Amongst them some fine examples of our best men. Oh, and we had a glorious time doing it, too, and showered the studios with golden rain. In some where it was evidently enough, needed. There was something childlike in the Grossenstecks' confidence in me. I mean the old people, for it was otherwise with Teresa, with whom I often quarreled over my artistic reforms, and who took any conflict in taste to heart. Oh, there were whole days when she would not speak to me at all, while on my side, well, I was equally obstinate, and all this, if you please, about some miserable tapestry or a Louis-sized chair or the right light for a picture of Will Lowes. But, no, she was such a sweet girl and so pretty that one could not be angry with her long. And what with our fights and our makings up, I dare say we made it more interesting to each other than if we had always agreed. It was only once that our friendship was put in real jeopardy, and that was when her parents decided they could not die happy unless we made a match of it. Oh, this was embarrassing for both of us. And for a while, she treated me so very coldly. But we had it out together one evening in the library and decided to let the matter make no difference to us, going on as before, the best of friends. I was the last person to expect a girl of 18 to care for a man of 40, particularly one like myself, an ugly and gray-haired, who had long before outworn the love of women. In fact, I had to laugh, one of those sad laughs that come to us with the years, at the thought of anything so absurd, and soon got her to give up her tragic pose and see the humor of it all, as I did. So we treated it as a joke. We rallied the old folks on their sentimental folly and let it pass. It set me thinking, however, a great deal about the girl and her future, and I managed to make interest with several of my friends and get her invited to some good houses. Of course, it was impossible to carry the old people into this galère. They were frankly impossible, but fortunately so meek and humble that it never occurred to them to assert themselves or resent their daughter going to places where they would have been refused. Uncle Gingersnaps would have paid money to stay at home, and Mrs. Grossensteck, she had too much homely pride to put herself in a false position. They saw, indeed, only another reason to be grateful to me, and another example of my surpassing kindness. Well, pretty, by no means a fool, and gowned by the best couturier of Paris. Oh, Teresa made quite a hit and blossomed, as girls do in social sunshine. The following year, in the whirl of a gay New York winter, one would scarcely have recognized her as the same person. Oh, she had made good, as boys say, and had used my stepping stones to carry her far beyond my kin. In her widening interests, her broader range, and increased worldly knowledge, we became, naturally, better friends than ever, and met on the common ground of those who led similar lives. Now, what man would not value the intimacy of a young, beautiful, and clever woman? In some ways, it's better than love itself, for love is a duel, with wounds given and taken, and, its pleasures are dearly paid for. Between Teresa and myself, there was no such disturbing bond, and we were at liberty to be altogether frank in our intercourse. One evening, when I happened to be dining at the house, the absence of her father and the indisposition of her mother left us tete-a-tete in the smoking room, whither she came to keep me company with my cigar. I saw that she was restless and with something on her mind to tell me, but I was too old a stager to force a confidence, least of all a woman's, and so I waited, said nothing, and blew smoke rings.
"Hugo," she said, "there is something I wish to speak to you about."
"I've known that for the last hour, Teresa," I said.
Stay with me. I'll be right back.
I saw that she was restless and with something on her mind to tell me, but I was too old a stager to force a confidence, least of all a woman's. And so I waited, said nothing, and blew smoke rings.
"Hugo,"
she said,
"there is something I wish to speak to you about."
"Oh, I've known that for the last hour, Teresa," I said.
"This is something serious,"
she said, looking at me strangely. "Blaze away," I said.
"Hugo," she broke out, "you have been borrowing money from my father."
I nodded.
"A great deal of money," she went on.
"For him? No," I said. "For me? Well, yes."
$800 or $900, she said.
"Those are about the figures," I returned. "Call it 900.
Oh, how could you? How could you?"
she exclaimed. I remained silent. In fact, I did not know what to say.
"Don't you see the position you're putting yourself in?" she said.
"Position," I said.
"What position?" "Oh, it's horrible. It's ignoble," she broke out. "I have always admired you for the way you kept yourself clear of such an ambiguous relationship. Why, you've known to the fraction of an inch what to take, what to refuse, to preserve your self-respect, my respect, unimpaired. And here I see you slipping into degradation. Oh, Hugo, I can't bear it."
"Is it such a crime to borrow a little money?" I asked.
"Not if you pay it back," she returned. "Not if you mean to pay it back. But you know you can't. You know you won't." "You think it's the thin edge of the wedge?" I said. "The beginning of the end and all that kind of thing?" You will go on, she cried. You will become a dependent in this house, a hanger-on, a sponger. I will hate you. You will hate yourself. It went through me like a knife when I found it out. I smoked my cigar in silence. I suppose she was quite right. Horribly right. Though I didn't like her any better for being so plain-spoken about it, I felt myself turning red under her gaze. "What do you want me to do?" I said, at length. "Pay it back," she said. "Oh, I wish to God I could," I said. "But you know how I live, Teresa, hanging on by the skin of my teeth, hardly able to keep my head above water, let alone having $1 to spare." "Then you can't pay," she said. "Oh, I don't think I can," I returned. "Then you ought to leave this house," she said. "You have certainly made it impossible for me to stay, Teresa," I said. "I want to make it impossible," she cried. You don't understand. Well, you think I'm cruel. It's because I like you, Hugo. It's because you're the one man I admire above anybody in the world. Why, I'd rather see you starving than dishonored." "Oh, well, thank you for your kind interest," I said, ironically. "Under the circumstances, I am almost tempted to wish you admired me less." "Am I not right?" she demanded. "Perfectly right," I returned. "Oh, yes, perfectly right." "And you'll go?" she said. "Oh, yes, I'll go," I said. "And earn the money and pay Father," she went on. "And earn the money and pay Father," I repeated. "And then come back," she added. "Never, never, never," I cried out. I could see her pale under the lights. "Oh, Hugo, don't be so ungenerous," she said. "Don't be so... She hesitated, apparently unable to continue. "Ungenerous or not," I said. "Damn the words, Teresa. This isn't a time to weigh words. It isn't in flesh and blood to come back. I can't come back. Put yourself in my place." "Someday you'll thank me," she said. "Oh, very possibly," I returned. "Nobody knows what may not happen. Oh, it's conceivable, of course. I might go down on my bended knees, but really, from the way I feel at this moment, I do not think it's likely." "You want to punish me for liking you," she said. "Teresa," I said, "I have told you already that you are right. You insist on saving me from a humiliating position. I respect your courage and your straightforwardness. You remind me of an ancient Spartan having it out with a silly ass of a stranger who took advantage of her parents' good nature. I am as little vain, I think, as any man, and as free from pettiness and idiotic pride, but you mustn't ask the impossible. Well, you mustn't expect the whipped dog to come back. When I go, it will be forever." "Then go," she said, and looked me straight in the eyes.
"I have only one thing to ask," I said. "Smooth it over to your father and mother. I am very fond of your father and mother, Teresa. I don't want them to think I've acted badly or that I have ceased to care for them. You tell them the necessary lies, you know."
"I will tell them," she said.
"Then goodbye," I said, rising. "I suppose I am acting like a baby to feel so sore, but I am hurt."
"Goodbye, Hugo,"
she said.
I went to the door and down the stairs. She followed and stood looking after me the length of the hall as I slowly put on my hat and coat. That was the last I saw of her. In the shadow of a palm, her girlish figure outlined against the black behind. I walked into the street with a heart like lead. And for the first time in my life, I began to feel I was growing old. I have been, from my youth up, an easygoing man, a drifter, a dawdler, always willing to put off work for play. But for once, I pulled myself together, looked things in the face, and put my back to the wheel. I was determined to repay that $900. If I had to cut every dinner party for the rest of the season, I was determined to repay it if I had to work as I had never worked before. My first move was to change my address. I didn't want Uncle Gingersnaps ferreting me out, and Mrs. Grossensteck weeping on my shoulder. My next was to cancel my whole engagement book. And my third, to turn over my wares and to rack my head for new ideas. I had a long-standing order from Granger's Weekly for a novelette. I had always hated novelettes, as one had to wait so long for one's money and then get so little. But in the humor I then found myself, I plunged into the fray, if not with enthusiasm, at least with a dogged perseverance that was almost as good. Granger's Weekly liked triviality and dialogue and a lot of fuss about nothing. And a happy ending. I gave it to them in a heaping measure. Dixie's Monthly, from which I had a short story order, set dialect above rubies. I didn't know any dialect, but I borrowed a year's file and learned it like a lesson. They wrote and asked me for another on the strength of The Courting of Amanda Jane. The Permeator was keen on Kipling and water, and I gave it to them, especially the water. Now, like all Southern families, the Dundonalds had once had their day. I had traveled everywhere when I was a boy. And so I accordingly refreshed my dim memories with some modern travelers and wrote a short series for The Little Gentleman. The Boy in the Carpathians, The Boy in Old Louisiana, A Boy in the Tyrol, A Boy in London, A Boy in Paris, A Boy at the Louvre,
a boy in Corsica, a boy in the Reconstruction. Oh, I reeled off about 20 of them and sold them to Advantage. It was a terribly dreary task, and I had moments of revolt when I stamped up and down my little flat and felt like throwing my resolution to the winds. But I stuck tight to the ink bottle and fought the thing through. My novelette, strange to say, was good, written against time and against inclination. It has always been regarded since as the best thing I ever did. And when published in book form, outran 3 editions. I made a thundering lot of money. For me, I mean. And in comparison to my usual income, seldom under $500 a month, and often more. In 11 weeks, I had repaid Rosensteck and had a credit in the bank. $900 has always remained to me as a unit of value, a sum of agonizing significance, not lightly to be spoken of, the fruits of hellish industry and self-denial. All this while I had had never a word from the Grossenstecks. Oh, they wrote to me often, telephoned, telegraphed, and my box at the club was choked with their letters. But I did not open a single one of them, though I found a pleasure in turning them over and wondering as to what was within them. There were several in Teresa's fine hand, and these interested me most of all and tantalized me unspeakably. There was one of hers cunningly addressed to me in a stranger's writing that, well, I opened inadvertently, but I at once perceived the trick and had the strength of mind to throw it in the fire, unread. Oh, perhaps you wonder at my childishness. Sometimes I wondered at it myself, but the wound still smarted, and something stronger than I seemed to withhold me from again breaking the ice. Besides, those long, lonely days and those nights, almost as long in the retrospect, when I lay sleepless on my bed, had shown me I had been drifting into another peril, no less dangerous than dependence. I had been thinking too much of the girl for my own good, and our separation had brought me to a sudden realization of how deeply I was beginning to care for her. Oh, I hated her too, the pitiless wretch, so there was a double reason for me not to go back. One night, as I had dressed to dine out and stepped into the street, looking up at the snow that hid the stars and silenced one's footsteps on the pavement, a woman emerged from the gloom, and before I knew what she was doing, had caught my arm. Well, I shook her off, thinking her a beggar or something worse, and would have passed on my way had she not again struggled to detain me. I stopped and was on the point of roughly ordering her to let me go when I looked down into her veiled face and saw that it was Teresa Grossensteck. "Hugo, Hugo," she said. I could only repeat her name and regard her helplessly. "Oh, Hugo," she said, "I am cold. Please, take me upstairs. I am chilled through and through." "Oh, but Teresa," I expostulated. It wouldn't be right. You know it wouldn't be right. You might be seen. She laid her hand, her ungloved, icy hand, against my cheek. Oof.
I have been here an hour, she said. Take me to your rooms. I am freezing.
I led her up the stairs and to my little apartment. I seated her before the fire, turned up the lights, and stood and looked at her. "What have you come here for?" I said. "I've paid your father. Paid him a month ago." She made no answer, but spread her hands before the fire and shivered in the glow. She kept her eyes fixed on the coals in front of her and put out the tips of her little slippered feet. And then I perceived that she was in a ball gown and that her arms were bare under her opera cloak. At last, she broke the silence.
How cheerless your room is, she said, looking about. Oh, how cheerless.
Did you come here to tell me that? I said.
No,
she said.
I don't know why I came. Because I was a fool, I suppose. A fool to think you'd want to see me. Take me home, Hugo.
She rose as she said this and looked towards the door. I pressed her to take a little whiskey, for she was still as cold as death and as white as the Snow Queen in Hans Andersen's tale. But she refused to let me give her any.
Take me home, please,
she repeated. Her carriage was waiting, a block away. Hendricks, the footman, received my order with impassivity and shut us in together with the unconcern of a good servant. It was dark in the carriage. Neither of us spoke as we whirled through the snowy streets. Once, the lights of a passing hansom illumined my companion's face, and I saw that she was crying. It pleased me to see her suffer. She had cost me 11 weeks of misery. Why should she escape scot-free?
Hugo,
she said.
Are you coming back to us, Hugo?
I don't know, I said.
Why don't you know?
She asked. Because, I said.
Oh, that's no answer,
she said. There was a pause. I was beginning to care too much about you, I said. I think I was beginning to fall in love with you. Now, I've got out of one false position. Why should I blunder into another?
Oh, would it be a false position to love me?
She said. Well, of course, that would a good deal depend on you, I said.
Suppose I wanted you to,
she said. Oh, but you couldn't, I said.
Why couldn't I?
She said. But 40, I objected. Nobody loves anybody who's 40, you know.
I do,
she said.
Though, come to think of it, you were 39 when it first happened, Hugo.
I put out my arms in the dark and caught her to me. I could not believe my own good fortune as I felt her trembling and crying against my breast. Oh, I was humbled and ashamed. It was like a dream. An old fellow like me? 40, you know. It was a mighty near thing, Teresa, I said.
I guess it was. For me,
she said. I meant myself, sweetheart, I said.
For both of us, then,
she said, in a voice between laughter and tears, and impulsively put her arms round my neck. Introduction information for this episode is from Robert Louis Stevenson, Lloyd Osbourne, and Collaborating with Kids by Eileen McGuinness, writer, researcher, sidekick, for her blog at eileenmcguinness.com, and other information in our show notes. Music for this episode is Where Is My Mind by Maxence Seurat. Dancing Michelangelo, Another Sunshine, and Seeds Don't Ask for Permission, all three by Luis Berra. And The Road Less Wandered by Aquilo, Syml. If you'd like to contact me, you can, right here in comments, or at fastasleepwithginamarie44@gmail.com, or on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Please keep us right here for you with your amazingly great reviews, with your likes, your comments, and oh yes, by subscribing. Thank you so much for listening. Keyword 40. Until next time. Good night.